When talking about U.S. Army uniforms in World War II, it is important to understand that there were several types, each with its own purpose. The first distinction was rank. Enlisted soldiers and officers had different uniforms. These differences ranged from minor changes in fabric to completely different uniform sets. World War II was also the first time the U.S. Army clearly separated combat uniforms, referred to as field uniforms, from garrison uniforms, referred to as service uniforms. On top of that, specialized troops, like armored soldiers and paratroopers, had additional gear to help them perform their duties. We'll start by looking at the service uniforms worn by soldiers. As mentioned, enlisted and officer uniforms were different. For enlisted soldiers, the service uniform had evolved since World War I. Back in 1918, the service tunic had an uncomfortable standing collar that was replaced in 1926 by a new coat with an open collar and lapels, which also became part of the field uniform until 1941. Soldiers wore a belt around this jacket until it was replaced with a proper field coat in 1941, leaving this coat solely as a garment in the service uniform. Underneath, soldiers wore an olive drab flannel shirt, which could be worn open without a tie or closed with a cotton wool necktie. This replaced the black mohair tie from 1940. They also wore straight wool trousers, standardized in 1938. Headgear changed over time as well. Until 1941, soldiers wore an olive drab wool peaked cap with an eagle insignia at the front. This was replaced by the overseas cap, standardized in 1941 as the garrison cap, which indicated arm or service colors through piping. Later in the war, in 1944, General Eisenhower introduced the Ike jacket, which replaced the open collar service coat for many soldiers. However, due to manufacturing constraints, both coats were worn through the end of the war. Officers wore a similar open-collared coat authorized in 1940, originally worn with a Sam Browne belt until 1942, when it was replaced with a cloth belt. A service cap of a darker olive drab shade was worn with an officer eagle cap device. Like enlisted, officers were also issued garrison caps of an olive drab color. They wore a pink shirt with shoulder loops allowing for rank insignia when worn without the coat. Service trousers of the same olive drab color were worn with this uniform. Officers also wore Ike jackets towards the end of the war in the same texture as the enlisted version. Additional cloth variations existed for officers, with the shirt, trousers, and garrison cap being available in different wool material, as well as personalized uniforms being worn frequently by officers. For both enlisted and officers, there was also a summer version of the service uniform, authorized in 1938. The wool shirt and trousers were replaced with cotton khaki versions, worn without a coat. The convertible collar could be worn with a tie or left open, making it practical for tropical regions. This summer uniform also served as the base for early field dress uniforms in hotter climates. The introduction of the 1941 field jacket marked the point where the U.S. Army began distinguishing between field uniforms and service uniforms. In the early years of the Second World War, soldiers wore the M1941 field jacket, as well as the ETO lined field jacket, first and second patterns. Just a year later, in 1942, the U.S. Army began developing a more universal combat uniform to replace the many different jackets and specialized coats that soldiers were using. This eventually became the M1943 jacket, although it wasn't until early 1945 that the uniform was delivered to the majority of troops. Additional variants of field jackets included an Arctic jacket designed for extreme cold climates and a Mackinaw coat. Both of these were eventually replaced by the M1943 standardized field jacket. Another type of field uniform was the herringbone twill fatigue uniform, commonly referred to as HBTs. These replaced the blue denim fatigue uniforms of earlier years. Limited numbers of troops also wore a camouflaged version of this uniform during the fighting in Normandy. Dress uniforms specified solely for officers provided a uniform for more formal occasions. However, by 1943, the wear of these uniforms became optional. Officers wore a blue dress coat with 4 pockets and an open collar, along with blue dress trousers that were braided in their respective branch color. A blue dress cap with branch piping and eagle insignia was worn as the cover. Officers would wear a blue dress belt around the coat. A separate white version with white versions of the uniform garments was also specified for U.S. Army officers. Due to the variety of field headgear worn by soldiers in World War II, it is important to cover them in their own section. Several hats were issued, including a cotton khaki field hat worn with field dress, which replaced the garrison cap as part of the field uniform in 1941. A herringbone twill hat was introduced in 1941 to complement the HBT fatigues. Other caps included an olive drab wool knit cap for cold weather operations. Additionally, a cotton field cap was manufactured to replace some of the previous variants, including the wool knit cap as a standard field cap. Another major category of headgear were steel helmets. The World War I helmet pattern, adopted in 1917, remained through the interwar period until it was replaced in mid-1941 by the M1 steel helmet. Several variations of this helmet existed over the years, along with additional liners and insignia worn by soldiers. With the overview of standard uniforms complete, we move on to specialized troop uniforms. The totality of Army uniforms was vast, so here we will focus on the main specialized troops: armored, airborne, and mountain troops. Armored troops in World War II held a long-standing tradition from earlier cavalry and mounted units. Breeches were worn by certain mountain units until 1944, along with knee-high cavalry boots. The HBT outfit discussed previously was used by armored troops as a one-piece coverall work suit paired with an HBT work cap. A specific cold weather combat uniform was developed for armored troops. Additionally, tankers wore a special helmet designed to allow microphone communication. Airborne troops initially wore the one-piece HBT suit, later replaced with a jumper coat featuring 4 pockets and an attached belt. Jumper trousers were also issued with similarly structured pockets to allow for ample storage. Paratrooper helmets had special trim straps, and they wore high-laced boots for additional support and protection during jumps. Mountain troops required weather-resistant clothing due to the harsh environments in which they operated. They were issued special mountain jackets that provided extra rain and wind resistance, along with matching mountain trousers. Other uniform items included a ski cap with wide ear flaps, a reversible ski parka, and ski mountain boots, all designed to keep soldiers protected and mobile in extreme conditions. The development of Army uniforms is a close study of what the nation's warfighters deemed successful when fighting for democracy. The vast updates that came after the Great War and the future updates after the Second World War lead us to the current Army uniforms and insignia, with many more changes to come in protecting freedom for our nation.